Yes, welcome to week 7. This is our last week together where we're taking a look at these different topics together. On this first one here, we have is strategic leadership on that we're covering this week. And then we're also going to get into a little bit about looking at different cultures and how leadership plays into that. So we take a look at first here when this first aspect of how leadership plays into strategy. Um, a leadership role is definitely in looking at strategy. There should always be an essence of how the plan is heading towards the mission and the vision and goals. Um, I've had this conversation with another one of my colleagues here over over this aspect of strategy. Um, I consider myself an operational strategist. Okay. And that means that my strategic leadership is great about the process of providing, the second part, the process of providing inspiration and direction in order to create or sustain an organization. That part I got. A lot of where I have is that on the analytics and the rest of that and looking at where the vision is and where the goals are to the organization, I'm a little weaker at. Some people are really good at it. They can see down that crystal ball down the road. You take an Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, they changed the world. But to say I have that type of creative strategic vision, now, personally, and you'll find that all of us are all along that scale somewhere along the way, taking a look at that. I can definitely provide direction and inspiration and get to a goal or to the goals along with the mission, but looking down where we should be looking at 10 years down the road, that's a little more difficult for me personally. So, but that's kind of the difference between the way we look at the differences in strategic leadership. So the organization itself has some agility. Okay, how quickly they can capitalize and is in the term of the COVID terms pivot. Okay, how quickly can an organization pivot on to capitalize on different opportunities? Um, and that's kind of where it's one of those where in knowledge management you have to know how quickly you can move that boat. In other words, is it a luxury liner or an aircraft carrier that's going to take it's going to take a long time to steer that boat into a circle, or is it a nice little speedboat that turns on a dime? Okay, you have to know where your organization stands. um, the the leader strikes that balance between innovation and regular operations. um Agility is definitely another aspect of it as well. For strategy in a company, gives them the opportunity to capitalize on opportunities that happen. In other words, if you see something that's there, it's going to be in the short term. How can you fill that void? um, and that's this aspect of agility. But you really got to know and analyze that to know if that really truly can happen. Um, Strategic thinking in the is seeing the overall picture. A lot of organizations become siloed, so it's very difficult for them to blend all that in. Okay, so you really got to think about how to all levels of the firm need to think strategically and see the whole picture. You get closer to the top, it's easier to see the big picture. It's up to us as leaders to communicate that big picture to those people that work with us at the bottom part of that. Strategy typically is long term. Okay. Um, the at the and that's really all of those aspects of it, even global uh, global aspects of it, and are we going to be? All these are strategic minded and they're long term. Strategy typically is not a short term answer, although you can have short term business strategies and marketing to put out this goal, or to move this or that. But realistically, you've got to, it's really a long term commitment of where are we going to be in 3 years, where are we going to be in 5. And right now, most everybody's in that 3 to 5 year range. They can't see beyond that aspect of it because the climate is just so volatile. This last part is a study of upper level leaders found that global experience allowed them to think more strategically. And this speaks well for our, you don't even have to work globally, but you could actually, even with the global experience we have here at the college, that helps you think differently as you look at things going forward. So a good experience, having traveled in many different countries of the world, it definitely gives you a different viewpoint and makes you a stronger leader, because you can also appreciate those differences. So we're back to maintaining that human and emotional aspect. Okay. When we look at this, when we look at strategy, we think it almost sometimes strategy needs to be kind of a numerical type of thing, or a numerical analyst. As my counterpart will tell me, it's all about understanding, but it's also about critical thinking. Okay. And it's about people. So when you look at strategies and picking one, it's a lot of intuition. Okay. I think this is the right way. Okay. Does it for, am I looking at all the aspects? Am I looking at the people aspects? Analytical tools are great for understanding where you're at. But once you get into where you're going, it's more of those aspects of those human emotional aspects, and thinking about where you can take the company, or where this idea could go. Again, this aspect of strategy becomes more humanistic than one thinks. Thinking about how you would gather insights. Strategic leaders get their you really kind of poll the audience, in the wide audience, if you want to look at it that way. They're polling everywhere. They're polling the organization, the stakeholders inside the organization. They're polling the outside, the aspects of what's going on outside the organization. They may have a board of directors, or most of them will have a board of directors, but they also may have a board of advisors. All of those are really good ideas about where to get, how you would look at things. And then you look at some point, the person has to stop and think about where they're going. In other words, the highest paid opinion, authority for most strategic decisions are left to the highest paid person. That's not always true, especially in groups. You can actually combine, and a lot of companies now are using this group aspect, although somebody will make the decision, but it's really a team effort. This is this aspect of crowdsourcing now has become an interesting dynamic when it comes to strategy, because you can actually look at trends and becomes a source of data. And when you're looking at crowdsourcing, so where are the crowdsourcing people putting money? Okay. What causes are they getting behind in the crowdsourcing aspect of it? And that's where you have to look, and that's where a lot of mid and upper level strategists will take a look at, just to kind of see where that gives them a good idea of where things are going. Collective intelligence from the public, social media, looking at the where people are going and where the directions of businesses are going through social media, Instagram, Snapchat now, on TikTok. Where are those new ideas coming from? And they say staff members shouldn't be asked what direction the organization should take here. But I'm saying, and typically most of the time, you poll and you do actually ask staff members, but it may not be that question. It might be, okay, looking at laying out a number of ideas and saying, okay, which one do you like? Which one's better for us? And thinking about all those aspects of it, so you do include your staff members in strategy, but you don't necessarily you don't ask them the question, where should we go? Because they're going to tell you higher wages and more time off, which is what people are doing now anyway. Artificial intelligence. Okay. Artificial intelligence are starting to come around where computers are emulating human intelligence. They're not quite there yet, but they are able to do a lot of AI does help a lot in the forecasting aspect of it, looking at putting those data with those and compiling a lot of those facts and observations from the data you talked about before. It could actually bring in crowdsourcing information on social media observations. And what they do is they then would be able to pull out some aspects of strategy. And what they're doing here is thinking about where the company could go. And AI, what it does is create a set of possible directions for them. It's not always given, it's not always right, but they're able to pull those things together and think about where they're going. And it's a source of information. It should never be treated at this point as the only source of information. Just like Hal there, no Hal's on this in the business world at the moment. So after you've got all these inputs, then you start to think about strategy and vision. Okay. Now when you start to look at the effectiveness of that for strategy implementation, does your vision match what you're trying to say? And is it clear enough for your vision to think about, to be able, as well as your strategy statements, to be able to be implemented by managers? Let's be honest with you, if you're changing a product, okay, it's the people on the ground, it's the boots on the ground that are going to be looking at changing that. Whether that's marketing reps, sales reps, you're going to be looking at even your manufacturing parts. And when you're changing strategies, all your employees and all your stakeholders within your business become important. Those are you definitely want to take a look at that. And then some businesses get a little cautious. They throw things out there from time to time. A lot of times your social media, they'll throw something out on social media and kind of see how it's working. Might be a product line, might be a new hat or whatever. They'll throw that out there and test it, and then see how people react to it. Same with advertising and marketing these days. They're throwing those aspects of strategy out there to see if they will float. Of course, we have our SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis, strategic, basically is a huge key to strategic planning, and should always be that way. So strategic planning should, definitely include the SWOT analysis, which is a really in-depth look of your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Okay, this becomes one of the major techniques when you're looking at strategy and where you should go. Capitalizing on your strengths, minimizing your weaknesses, looking for those opportunities and those threats. that you might have to address. This is just walking through how the basics of SWOT analysis does. I'm sure that you may have had a process. You should have had at least a little inkling of SWOT up to this point. So it is a process to do, but it's actually very, very good to do that. Conducting the analysis, okay. This is really what you're looking at in the analysis part: internal, external, okay, weaknesses and strengths, opportunities and threats, and you look at this both internally and externally to really get a good picture. Now we're in this aspect of knowledge creation, knowledge dissemination, and knowledge application. Okay. So when you're looking at these three aspects, and knowledge management these are kind of the three parts of knowledge management. So when you look at knowledge management, is managing that information that that comes in, and how much do you actually disseminate? Okay. So when you're learning, a learning organization takes a look at everything that comes in and out and everything that's going in and around it. And what it does is it comes in, okay, this is something that's important. This is not something that's important. Okay. So when it learns something that's important, that's obviously knowledge creation. Then you need to get that out to everybody. So that's dissemination, moving that information out to there. And then that gives people that opportunity to apply that knowledge. So from the top down or from the bottom up, where that knowledge comes in, the process really works the same. Is get it in, identify if it's valuable. Is it something we need to be working with? Is it something we need to be learning? Do we need to learn that? And then moving on into getting that information out and then applying it. In this slide, we're talking a little bit about the learning organization, which is that the learning organization both is one that promotes this aspect of everybody's got to learn. It's it goes back to that transformational leadership again. Is how we can make people better. So better people make better organizations. So for strategic leaders, they're bringing those aspects in and trying to really get people to know that. Even actually, there's a couple of companies out there that have what they call a chief knowledge officer, which is they're in charge of figuring out how the organization can learn. Okay, so what can we do to get our people in to understand this, to move and keep things moving and learning through the organization and changing. And we're back to the transformational leadership again. Transformational leadership encourages innovation and encourages involvement from people. Transactional ones, transactional ones can still learn, but they're really about improving existing items and existing knowledge. They're not looking to go out on the limb and learn something new on the other side. And exploitation is this aspect of learning where we can turn around and make some incremental improvements. So, and what we call it, that also is called leveraging. It's basically, instead of exploitation, I kind of look at it as leveraging, which is learning those small things that can make a difference in everybody's work life, but not necessarily have a huge impact in the big strategy aspect of it. Again, you've got to you're the person who's in charge of learning and getting that organization aspect to learn. So making sure that there actually is processes involved, okay, that reinforces learning. In other words, I used to have this aspect of in my process and in my organization, which is where we would debrief after basically almost every function. We would debrief. Okay, what did we learn? What went well? What didn't go so well? Where can we improve? Okay, that's all learning. And it was forcing my team to really think about how things went in that performance aspect of it and how we could make things better. That also creates the shared vision. And when you're looking at all of these, learning from failure, okay, I learned lots from my failures in my time. Okay, you can learn from failure. Action learning. Here's one of those where you learn by working on the problem itself. And then encouraging organizational members to think again creatively. So this is really the leadership aspect of how you can make things much more solid in the aspect of learning. Okay, now we'll take a look at cultural diversity. Diversity and inclusion is a huge issue now at all levels. Okay. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So ensuring that everything is diversity is obviously making sure everybody's inclusive or included in comes to the table. Okay. Equity is ensuring that all resources and opportunities are provided to everybody. You would think that that would be a given, but sometimes that's not. And sometimes you have to go out of your way to make sure that they are for those underrepresented and historically challenged individuals, where you may have to actually go out and make sure that they understand those resources are available to them. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion. It really is starting to highlight the entire picture of groups, of people, and really, because our workforce is that diverse. Okay, and it is being increasingly global. Okay, which means there's a good chance in these days you're going to encounter somebody who is Muslim. You're going to encounter somebody who is gay, or any other. You may encounter some others that are in that aspect of the alphabet there, because the alphabet, those are all individuals that should be included at the table, and we need to sometimes have to go out to make sure that they understand that. And our products are more global. Okay, so we really truly have to understand that aspect of it, because global outsourcing is definitely a trend, but I'm not quite so sure. We may be turning the tide slightly back to domestic production in some areas at this point when you take a look at it, due to the supply chain issues. So when we talk about cultural diversity, we kind of look at two different frames. Okay, there's the value and difference, okay, which is realistically recognizing that the differences in people have significant value. Okay? In other words, somebody, and this is where I'll share my story of one of my first operations I had. It was at a golf club working for the PGA Tour. But my kitchen consisted of an interesting, on the surface, a very interesting group of people. I had a female sous chef who was white. I had a white line cook. I had 3 people who worked in our pantry area, cold foods, and prep. One was Chinese, who spoke very little English. Another one was who was a veteran who was in a retraining program. And the third one was a high school student who was filling in the differences. And we also had a few other, and I had a couple of high school people who washed dishes, and then I also during the day had an individual with Down syndrome who worked during the day with it, washing dishes. These people here, that group of people, because they were able, I valued their differences and put those differences together like we would put together a jigsaw puzzle. Okay. And valuing those differences allowed us to build a team that could be of those 10 or 12 people that could do $1.2 million in 10 months a year. Okay. In food revenue. So, and this is back in the late early 90s. Okay. So that would be significantly differently now. But you would look at that by valuing those differences. I could put those people together and really enhance both my production and my profitability. Okay. You know, that Chinese cook, for instance, could sit there all day long and produce all sorts of banquet platters as long as I showed him what I wanted. And they looked fantastic. You know, the man owned his own bodega for 35 years in New York City. So he was used to doing that type of work. That's what he brought to the table. Now the value and equality frame takes a look at the appeal to equality and fairness, no matter what the differences are. Okay, so basically emphasizes that the differences aren't going to make a difference in advancement, that they're going to be judged on merit, and really live up to the fact that they're an equal opportunity employer. So what you really have to look at is that, are you doing everything based on merit? I used to have to, and that's the way I judged people. It didn't matter to me. It was always, I always used to say, and still do, the little green Martian, the little green guy from Mars walked in, and he was the guy who was the fit for the job, and he could do the job, then he would get the job. No matter how different he was, because that's what's important about understanding our cultural frames and understanding that, you know, everybody brings something to the table. These are some advantages to looking at diversity. But realistically, these are all good things to happen. These are all things that you should be doing to helping manage diversity. But realistically, it comes down to this: is really treating your people and understanding your people. It goes back to that relationship transformational leadership style, and understanding the relationships with your employees. Anything that's here, you should be doing if you really are living up to those two things: building a relationship with your employees and understanding where they're going, what is their goals, how to transform them, how to make them successful. Then diversity becomes self-evident. It's not something that happens, it's something that's built in, because you're helping the individuals progress through that transformational leadership. So you're looking at these aspects here of cultural values. Okay, performance orientation is pretty self-explanatory. You look at these aspects. This is where Hofstede come in, and Hofstede. Sorry about that. Okay, so where are we? I've gone too far ahead. Okay. This was an interesting aspect. These are an individual called Hofstede who looked at this aspect of what these cultural dimensions are, as we're taking a look at them. And you'll see this in a couple other, you'll encounter this in international business, and you'll encounter this in a couple of other places as well, where Hofstede is talked about. So you look at Hofstede, typically he's looking at these, and there's 10 of these here. Originally it was just 8, okay? But this is where, these are the dimensions that we look at, okay? Performance orientation, work orientation, those are kind of self-explanatory. Uncertainty avoidance is really how individuals view risk, okay? Are they okay with risk? Are they not okay with risk? Okay. Power distance. How close how close to the power are they? Okay. Or how far away from the power are they? If they're a worker on the floor, the power distance is narrow between them and their supervisor, but between them and the CEO, it's going to be a drastically different aspect. Gender equalitarianism, well, that's a mouthful, is basically trying to understand, basically is stating that no matter what gender, or in this case, affiliation that you're looking at, or the way you would choose to identify yourself, should not matter in the job, but does play in some instances into how you would have to understand those individuals. In-group collectivism versus individualism. Some people prefer to work in groups. Some people prefer to be individuals. Humane orientation is how centered are they to the actual human, to other humans. If you have, for instance, if you have somebody coming from the Mideast, their values are going to be different than what ours would be. So the way they look at women is going to be different. All those things play a role in how you would deal with that employee. Time orientation. What is their view of time? Some cultures, time is huge, it's paramount, such as the Asian cultures. Time is definitely paramount. Japan, China, being on time is so critical for them. Whereas the Latin cultures, for instance, or the islanders, time is not as important to them. And you have to understand those types of things. Future orientation is about how an individual looks at the sense of future and how long range they can get. And then assertiveness. Some cultures are very submissive, and some individuals within cultures will be submissive, and then others will be assertive. So they're going to be the strong, outgoing portion. So these Hofstede identified all of these of things that we will want to look at. So a multicultural leader really puts all those pieces together. Like I said, I've worked with many different cultures in many different times. I've been in different countries. I actually worked in Switzerland for a while. So understanding how those 3 countries within a country actually operate, it was actually an eye-opener for me. Also, in that aspect, I was working for a school, so I got the understanding of a very broad-based multicultural aspect of these individuals, whether it be from Russia or from Sweden or Norway. Cultural factors there, understanding that that realistically, they love to share about their culture, and understanding that you really want to embrace that. So is to examine, this last one is understanding cultural values, getting them to understand where their values fit on this last screen over here. How do they view about these things? You as the leader, once you build that relationship with them, can easily go ahead and work that out. Differences in cultural values here. These are all those things that we just talked about. And those are the same things that you would want to make sure that you're really understanding the individual so you can meet their needs. It doesn't matter what aspect of this. Understanding these 10 factors are extremely important from a relationship aspect. Cultural sensitivity, okay, is it's interesting as being a cross-cultural leader myself. Okay, you have to be aware, make yourself aware of the nuances and customs. Okay, and understanding that there's good and bad in both of those. But being sensitive and then figuring out how you can be flexible enough to help meet their needs, but realistically at the same time giving back feedback where cultural norms may cross some norms that we would consider to be in societal norms. So balancing how you would balance those two out, and being able to get them to come together and work together. It goes back to that managing the individual again. So you really kind of want to know those individuals and understand how you can be sensitive to what they're doing. Like for instance, if they're Muslim, understanding that, their need for prayer, you may end up having to give them their break at the time for prayer. So that way they have the ability to go do that. Or the understanding that the Jewish population, their Sabbath is on their religious day is on Saturday, not Sunday. So understanding that, they might not be willing to work Saturday, so you may have to work around that and being flexible with them. Those are just a couple examples of ways that you have to be flexible in dealing with their culture, so you can get being able to utilize them as very productive workers. Leadership skills refer to exercise effective leadership in a variety of countries. Global leadership is definitely one of those aspects where you have to understand that you have cultural sensitivity, that you can, you bring all these things together, and then you're going to plop you in another country where the total culture is different, and then you can adapt to that. And you're going to effectively, and this is the way I look at it. As a transformational leader, I never really changed my viewpoint when I went abroad. But that cultural experience and that cultural aspect awareness has allowed me to work with many cultures, and you kind of vary how you deal with them depending on their culture and how you're working with them. And that's exactly, basically what global leadership is. International management positions. These are a couple of things that would be there's two traits typically for success in international management. Basically you're sensitive to cultural issues and being culturally adventurous, okay, willing to take some to experiment and take chances. I definitely managed to do that. Okay, emotional intelligence is key for to have cultural intelligence. You really have to be emotionally intelligent. They kind of, in my mind, they kind of go hand in hand, because if you don't have emotional intelligence, it's very difficult for you to understand the differences in the cultural aspect of it. Tolerance for ambiguity, and you should have a good command of a second language. But that's not always the case. I mean, I can tell you I've been in plenty of countries where I'm not, my command of the second language is not great, but I can get by. And I think that's what's important. And these are some initiatives that you can look at for achieving cultural diversity. But those are, but realistically, it really boils back to the last things that I talked about. And that is, really hiring the right people for the right job for the right reasons. Always understanding that, when you have two equally qualified individuals, it comes down sometimes to the fine points. And you just have to check yourself to make sure that you're not hiring that person who's in the majority because it's easy. And that's really what you really want to avoid. Whereas in this aspect of it is establishing programs for recruitment, retention, mentoring, conducting cross-cultural training. Okay. You know, avoiding group characteristics when hiring for an organizational fit. What I'm looking for is individual characteristics. I'm not looking for the group characteristics. Other than what I do is factor in the group characteristics to see how the puzzle fits together. And I've always managed to have diversity. So in all those aspects of where I'm at. So you can achieve a good cultural diverse company or organization without really having much difficulty. All right, that kind of wraps us up for the course. You'll have a final exam next week, and then you'll be working on that final paper. And I hope everybody enjoyed your time in MG 350.